climate change is not just another issue on the long list of global problems. It is not something we can put off for tomorrow or treat as a distant concern that belongs only to scientists, policymakers, or activists. It is the defining challenge of our time, the biggest test humanity has ever faced. For centuries, human beings have shaped the earth to serve our needs, building cities, carving roads, digging into the ground for fuel, and pouring smoke into the skies. For a while, it seemed as if the earth could absorb it all, that nature would bend endlessly to our will. But now, the balance has shifted. The planet is speaking back to us through melting ice, rising seas, burning forests, and storms of unprecedented ferocity. The question is no longer whether climate change is real. The question is whether humanity can rise to meet this crisis before it consumes us. The story of climate change is, in many ways, the story of human progress. When our ancestors discovered fire, it was a miracle of survival. When we learned to harness coal, oil, and gas, it unlocked the Industrial Revolution, lifting millions out of poverty, powering machines, and creating modern civilization. Fossil fuels gave us speed, power, and convenience. But like a dangerous drug, their benefits came with hidden costs, costs we ignored for generations. Every factory that poured smoke into the air, every car that burned gasoline, every power plant that consumed coal left behind an invisible debt, a debt measured in carbon, trapped in the atmosphere like a blanket around the earth. At first, it seemed harmless, but as the decades passed, the blanket grew thicker, holding in heat, disrupting weather, and changing the rhythms of life. Today, we live in the shadow of that debt. The Earth is nearly 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than it was before the Industrial Age. That number may sound small, but its consequences are enormous. It means glaciers that stood for millennia are vanishing. It means heat waves that once occurred once in a century now strike every few years. It means stronger hurricanes, more devastating floods, and longer droughts. For millions of people, climate change is not a future scenario but a daily reality. Farmers in Africa watching their crops wither under relentless heat. Families in island nations seeing their homes swallowed by rising seas. Entire communities forced to flee wildfires that spread faster and fiercer than ever before. The crisis is not abstract. It is here, and it is accelerating. But climate change is not only a test of survival for the planet. It is a test of survival for our humanity. At its core, the climate crisis is about choices, who we are, how we live, and what kind of future we want to leave behind. Will we continue down the path of short-term gain, consuming resources as if they are endless, ignoring the warnings of science, and passing the burden to future generations? Or will we have the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, to change our habits, to rethink our systems, and to act not only for ourselves but for those who will inherit this earth long after we are gone? One of the greatest challenges of climate change is that it is both everywhere and invisible. We can see the hurricanes, the wildfires, the floods, but the true enemy, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, has no color, no smell, no taste. It slips quietly into the atmosphere with every engine we start, every plane we board, every plastic bottle we discard. And because it is invisible, it is easy to ignore, easy to deny. Yet it is the most dangerous force of all, reshaping the climate system that has allowed human life to flourish for thousands of years. The Earth's climate is not just weather, it is the delicate web of patterns that governs food, water, and stability. When that web unravels, everything we depend on begins to falter. Scientists have warned us for decades. Reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change paint a stark picture. We must limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius if we want to avoid the worst consequences. Beyond that, we risk tipping points, moments when the damage becomes irreversible. Ice sheets collapsing into the sea. Rainforests turning into dry savannas. Oceans acidifying to the point where coral reefs vanish, and with them, countless marine species. These tipping points are like dominoes. Once one falls, it triggers another, and soon the entire system could spiral out of control. The time to act, scientists say, is not tomorrow, not in the next decade, but now. And yet, despite the urgency, humanity struggles to respond. Why? Because climate change demands something we are not used to: long-term thinking. Our politics is short-term, driven by elections and popularity. Our economies are short-term, driven by quarterly profits and endless growth. Our daily lives are short-term, focused on convenience, speed, and comfort. Climate change forces us to step outside this cycle, to imagine consequences decades or even centuries ahead. It forces us to care not only about ourselves but about people we will never meet, future generations who will live with the results of our actions. It asks us to redefine what responsibility means on a planetary scale. There is also the question of justice. Climate change is not fair. The countries that contributed least to the problem are often the ones suffering the most. Nations in the global south, with the smallest carbon footprints, face rising seas, deadly droughts, and food insecurity, while the wealthier nations that built prosperity on fossil fuels still hesitate to cut emissions. Within countries, too, the poorest communities bear the heaviest burdens, living in flood-prone areas, lacking resources to rebuild after disasters, and working in jobs most vulnerable to climate shocks. Climate change exposes not only the fragility of our environment but also the inequalities of our world. It asks us, will we continue to allow the vulnerable to carry the weight, or will we share the responsibility and act as one human family? Of course, the story of climate change is not only about danger. It is also about possibility. For every crisis, there is a chance for transformation. Renewable energy. Solar, wind, hydro has become cheaper and more accessible than ever before. Electric vehicles are beginning to replace gasoline cars. Innovations in sustainable agriculture, green buildings, and energy storage are reshaping industries. Entire cities are experimenting with new models of transportation, waste reduction, and clean power. The solutions are within our reach. What is lacking is not technology but political will, collective courage, and the recognition that the cost of inaction far outweighs the cost of action. Think of what is at stake. If we fail, we will condemn future generations to a world of chaos, a world where cities drown, forests burn, crops fail, and millions are displaced. But if we succeed, we will not only prevent disaster, we will create a world that is cleaner, healthier, and fairer. Imagine cities with clean air, powered entirely by renewable energy. Imagine economies that thrive without destroying ecosystems. Imagine children growing up in a world where nature is not something to exploit but something to respect. This is not a utopian dream. It is a possible reality, if we choose it. The philosophy of climate change, if we can call it that, is ultimately about humility. For too long, humanity has acted as if we are separate from nature, as if the earth is merely a resource to be mined, cut, burned, and consumed. Climate change reminds us that we are not separate. We are part of the earth, dependent on its systems, bound by its limits. Our survival is tied to the survival of forests, oceans, and atmosphere. To face climate change is to face ourselves, to question the values that have driven our choices, and to discover whether we are capable of living not against nature but with it. As we stand at this crossroads, the path forward is both daunting and inspiring. The test is immense. Never before has humanity faced a challenge that spans every nation, every culture, every generation. But never before have we had the knowledge, the tools, and the global connections to act together. The question is not whether we can rise to the challenge. The question is whether we will. Climate change is humanity's biggest test of survival, but it is also our greatest opportunity to redefine what it means to be human. Will we be remembered as the species that destroyed its own home in pursuit of endless consumption? Or will we be remembered as the generation that stood on the brink of disaster and chose courage, responsibility, and solidarity? The answer lies not in the hands of a few but in all of us, what we choose, what we demand, and how we act. The clock is ticking, the storms are growing, and the earth is calling. The time to decide our legacy is now.